Ladies and gentlemen, let us make a start. Welcome, very much welcome. My name is Neil. I'm from ChangeSchool, and my colleague Viren is with me as well. Viren, do you want to say hello?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're very glad to be here. Neil and I have done a session for the Scientific and Methodological Training Center. A couple of years ago, we ran a session for BIMM, and it's a privilege to be invited back to do the session. And we're very grateful to Jamelia and Olga at the British Council and Shaknozam at BIMM for having arranged this session. And we depend on Nilofer to make it interesting and relevant for you. Thank you.
Fantastic. So here we go, ladies and gentlemen. We have been asked to talk to you about academic autonomy. So hold on, who are we? Why are we talking to you? Well, so it came about because we do some work in Uzbekistan. And we're a company that has worked across 22 different countries, as you can see there on the map. And we've developed faculty in 101 different universities. So we're very lucky and very privileged to have listened to a lot of people from around the world in this topic of academic autonomy. So we hope we can bring something to you to maybe help you think it through. So that's why us. So, academic autonomy. You asked, ladies and gentlemen, some questions about it. Yep. Right at the beginning when you were registering, which is really helpful. Thank you. Things about management issues in particular. How do you use academic autonomy? How do you reveal new innovations? Really, really helpful. Thank you very much. That helped us prepare. And we were told about the decree back in October, I believe, the President of the Republic, according to the concept for further development of higher education, has actually said that you will all be granted academic autonomy, and granted it to meet the needs of the labour market and to improve students' employability skills. That's what we've been told. Right, there it is. There it is in Russian. Yeah. So that's our starting point. That's where we've started from. Thanks, Olga. So, therefore, if the purpose of academic autonomy is to solve a problem, right? If the purpose is to meet the needs of the labour market, improve students' employability, if that's the purpose, the first thing you have to work out is, what is the problem? What is the problem that we are solving? Before you go to ideas and solutions, we've faced in the UK, I'm going to start with an example, right? We've faced in the UK a similar thing around academic autonomy. We had to decide what the problem was that we were solving. And so what I hope is, if I give an example of what we've done, it might help you think through whatever you, ladies and gentlemen, are trying to do. So, here was the problem that we had in the UK. We realised that whatever knowledge we could give our students wasn't ready for them, because in 10 years' time, the knowledge they need doesn't exist yet. We were preparing them for jobs that didn't exist yet.
Are you sharing, Neil?
Yeah. Sorry, thank you. All right. We were preparing them for technologies that didn't exist yet because the world was changing too fast. So we thought, well, how, if we don't have that knowledge, if that knowledge doesn't exist, how can we teach them? How can we prepare them? So what we had to do was get them ready to learn. We had to get them ready as learners.
Okay.
Yeah. And here's an example of how it's been done. So this is just one example. So we found a problem, and this is how we tried to solve it, just to give you an example of the way the process works. So if we had to think, how do we create innovative, employable students? We started with, how do we define what we need? If the problem is to develop students into enterprising, flexible, innovative people, we've got to decide what that means and help students learn it. So we started to define it. And this is a European Union piece. It's a competency framework called Entrecomp. And it divides some of these enterprise skills into 15 different sections. Ideas and opportunities, resources, and into action. Now, there's a Russian version I can show you that will help. I'll give you a moment to look at that and to read it. So we identified what the competencies were. So this is the outcomes we're looking for. These are the outcomes. We identified what the competencies were. We described them. Just to give you an idea. We decided what evidence we needed for each. And then we mapped it across, so that what you can see is this is all based not on what people are taught, but on what the outcome is.
So,
Go on, Vern. No? Okay. And then you can map the progression. So step one is, what is the problem? Step two is, how do we define what people need to solve the problem? And we did it on competencies. Step one was, what's the problem? Step two is, how do we define, how do we know when we've solved it? And we know by building a competency framework. So it's not about what you're being told to teach, it's about the outcomes that you want the students to get. And then you can map it and you can see the progress, because you can evidence those competencies. Here's a question.
So Neil,
Yeah.
Neil, I just wanted to come in here because I think there was Mr. Abazek, Batuso, even Olga's. Few people have basically asked, right? How do we manage competence levels? And I think here is an idea that when you develop your standards and when you develop what are the proficiency levels you have, you can then build in and just make it evidence-based. It's just to handle, so even if you are looking to develop a competence, you can say that if someone is using it in the classroom, it's level 1. If they can go and do it under some minimal supervision, it's level 3. And if they can do it independently and go and create new knowledge and train other people, it may be level 4, 5, or 6. So there is the whole process of developing a QA or a competency framework around what is relevant to what you might want to develop in Uzbekistan. This is, of course, an example from the UK and how they did it in enterprise skills. Back to you, Neil.
So here's a question, and maybe we'll try it on the chat window and see what people think. Here is a competence. In English on the left and Russian on the right. It's the same. One of these competencies is, how do you cope with uncertainty, with risk, with ambiguity, with not knowing what's going to happen? How can we create students that can cope with that? And you've got a description there, and you've got different levels that you would want to evidence. You, ladies and gentlemen, all teach very advanced subjects at university. How could you include that competence in what you teach? How could you include that competence in what you teach? Anybody got any ideas they could put in the chat window? Anybody got any ideas they could put in the chat window? See if anybody's got any ideas.
Ну, идея-то, конечно, есть. Кому говорить это? Ну, конечно, у меня английский не совсем хороший. Ну, например, я как математик, я всегда студентам говорю, вы можете делать любую ошибку, только не грубую, например. И это тоже учитывается, потому что это же выход из положения. Например.
That sounds like an interesting thing that I can't understand.
Go ahead, Nilufar, I can hear. Tell me. Yes.
Yep. Hello. So somebody was talking in Russian. I'm afraid I don't, or Uzbek. I'm afraid I don't understand. But it sounded interesting. Sounded about mathematics.
Fantastic.
Did they translate already his words?
So
did you understand?
I heard you. Yes, and that is a very good idea in this thing, and and in many other subjects, you can basically, by telling them that you don't have to, failure is a part of learning, and we will show you in some of the learning models out there. This is a very good way of encouraging them to try alternative ways to find solutions out there. So one is understanding what is the risk. The other is being able to evaluate what the risk is. That is level 3 to 4. And the third one is then actually take a decision and implement despite that. So it's a good thing about
Right. So, just as an example, Verona, you okay on the other channel? Okay, let's go on then. So, let's say you've identified a problem. Let's say you've then decided, well, what is the outcome that we want? How can you use academic autonomy to try and solve a real world problem? 3 ways of doing it. One we've just thought about. I can change what I teach and how I teach. That's the tactical level, the first level. Second thing is to think about, well, what about how different from what I teach? What can I change about what students learn and how they learn? And the third level is thinking very strategically. It's thinking about your stakeholders and what they need. Let's take them one by one. Tactical, skills into lessons. Luckily, there is a lot of help in the world around this. People have been thinking about it for a long time. So, for example, I believe there is a radiographer in the group. So I picked radiography. And what you can see here is part of the radiography qualification statement from the UK's QAA. The QA is the Qualifications and Curriculum Authority in the UK. That's what some students have to do. They have to have, as a radiographer, a capacity for reflection. They have to be able to communicate. Of course, your doctor has to be able to communicate with nurses, with the pharmacy, with you. It's a very important skill for a doctor. So they said, well, if that's what radiographers need, it's also the sorts of skills that enterprise, the students learning enterprise and learning this flexibility of thinking need. So here's my problem. I need students to think in an enterprise manner. Some of them are doing radiography in university. How do I put enterprise skills in radiography so they all students have these skills? Here's an example. And you can see this here, that's a simple exercise. It's a presentation exercise. And what it does is it develops those practical communication skills, and it hits both the radiology standards and the enterprise themes. Does both at the same time. So from the teaching level, you simply say, how can I solve the problem, still teaching what I'm teaching? And this is a very, very handy. This is a very, very useful resource here, because this exists online, and I'll give you the link later. So you can look at lots of different lessons and see how you can use those skills. This has been done in the world already. For example, what other profession would need those skills? It's not just radiographers, right? Everything from lawyers to engineers to somebody working in history or archaeology and presenting papers or communicating with the public.
Political science.
Political science, exactly, absolutely, perfect. Very much so. Very much so. So you can take the skills and map them across all different subjects in your teaching. That's one way of using the academic autonomy. Yeah. And that's what they've done there. Just like a grid. Second one out of the three.
So Neil, can I just go back one second, because I just wanted to address. So I think one of you had asked this question. How do I enhance learners' motivation while learning theoretical subjects? So one of the ways to look at it is, and I think there was a question asked about the gentleman who's teaching mathematics. Again, look in any of these subjects where any of the skills are applied on the left-hand side. And towards the end, we will show you some resources. You can go and look at some activities that enhance the learning and the interest in these subject areas. But yes, for sure, you can use some of these teaching techniques to increase the interest and motivation in theoretical subjects.
Okay. Second out of three. How do you organize learning, which is more than teaching? Varen, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, and if you want to jump onto the other channel, just give me a thumbs up, which gives me a...
Sure. I can't, because I can't. I've lost the button.
You've lost the button, right. Okay, so a number of you have asked that, how do we look at more innovative teaching methods? Now, this is in the area that if you are teaching a particular piece of content, looking at more than one way of teaching it to different levels of outcome. So the one that 90% of us are very familiar with is called learning about. And how we basically spend most of the time in the classroom teaching the subject, the theory behind it, the formulas, and our assessment then is based on either reproducing the theory or applying the theory to certain situations or problems, theoretical problems, and checking whether they've got the right or wrong answer. Yes, everybody familiar with that? You can let me know in the chat window if you find that, which is formal education. Okay. There's another way of doing it, and we also do some of this in our universities. If Neil, if you can come on. And the technique is called learning for. So it's not learning about, it's learning for. And here we do a little bit of the understanding of the theory before we come into class, but the bulk of the session, the contact time, is spent on practicing and applying the techniques rather than learning the technique. It is applying it, and it could be the equivalent to doing laboratory experiments to see how theory works in practice. And it has slightly better retention because it's not just knowledge, it's knowledge and skills and the ability to apply it, which makes also the student a little more employable, right? Because he knows, because when he goes into the job, he not doing it for the first time. He's had some practice at a university level. So again, assessment is based on solving practical problems, results as derived from applying theory. So that's a learning 4 technique, and we're familiar with some of these. The third one, Neil. The third one is a dramatically different approach to learning. That is that you do not give them the theory or the framework before they start. You actually ask them to solve a problem out there, and you give them a little bit of guidance on how to do this. And they will struggle, they will make some errors, there will be a little bit of failure, and you help and you pull them up, and they go through a whole experiential journey. And through guidance provided by the teaching teaching faculty, you then help and help them either derive the theory or derive the framework, or present the theory or the framework right at the end and say, this is how you might want to do it. So it's a learning through a process. It's the guided discovery of solutions. It encourages trial and error. And I think Umida had mentioned this. We should teach our students not to be afraid of making mistakes. And the graduate skills you achieve here is not just knowledge and skills, but it's also other enterprise skills of doing research, solving problems, critical thinking, trial and error, experimentation, and keeping what we want to say is a continuous learning culture. Now, the big question is, how do you do assessment in this particular situation? And the assessment then is not just on whether they got the right or wrong answer, but the assessment is how did they engage with it? How did they describe their learning? What was their reflection as a part of the process, and what they're committing to do in the future? So yes, it does require additional effort, but it's a dramatically different discovery-based learning process, which is very, very different from the traditional methods we have out here. And the beauty of using a technique like this and using your autonomy to create a small change in your curriculum like this is you're preparing them for skills that when they go into employment in the future, even if they have to solve problems for which technologies don't exist today, they are able to do so. So this is what Neil talked about, the second level, which is the operational level, how you can look at your same piece of learning and teach it in 2 or 3 completely different ways. And when we go to the next slide, we will show you that you may need support in the university to do that. I think, Neil, you might want to explain that.
Not only that, so part of academic freedom and part of that curriculum change, and Varun, do you want to pop on the other channel so you can help me with the thumbs up?
Yeah.
Part of that academic freedom and part of that curriculum change goes beyond the taught curriculum. So what's along the bottom here is what's outside, the learning being applied within your institutions, but outside of the curriculum.
Nilofer, are you okay to translate? Or just translate the slide then as it is, yeah?
So the top piece is what they might learn.
Yeah, top left, yeah.
And the bottom piece is what your students might learn outside of that formal taught curriculum, because you've got other things happening in your university. So
let me come in here, Nilofer. So basically, I think the fundamental thing is that there are ways of doing it in class, and there's also, you can have extracurricular activities to support and embed the learning. People do it a lot in when they teach subjects like entrepreneurship, where they have student clubs and societies. Just one more minute here. All right. Okay. Thank you. Neil, continue, please.
Right. So level 1, what you teach in your classroom. Level 2, how you organize learning around that. Level 3, how do you find out if you're solving the problems? How do you find out if you're helping? How do you get help from people outside? This is about engagement of stakeholders. So, as the president said, this is about helping employability. It's about helping industry. So how can you engage? This is just one example, just a simple example. We've been working in 5 different countries, including Uzbekistan, around entrepreneurship in university. It's a future skill, an enterprise skill. What we've started to build is to say, look, if we have a change in the teaching and learning at the university that gives students skills. Those skills, they start to work with local businesses. They start to work with the finance community. They start to work with industry while they're at university, to study, to understand, to try things. The academics help them. They mentor them. And because they are helping them and they are mentoring them, conversations between business, between communities, between students and between academics start to happen. The two sides of those conversations start to learn from each other, and the academics take that learning back into the curriculum. So you start to involve your community and industry in the aims and objectives of your curriculum. That's not changing your academic understanding or your knowledge, but it's looking at, well, if I understand what my stakeholders need, I can think about what I need to teach and how I need to teach it in order to help the students as they come out of university. Maybe I'll give Nilafar a moment to finish with that.
Neil, you can move on.
Right, fantastic. One way in which this is done, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is something called a knowledge exchange office, who organise these opportunities for people to talk, who support and facilitate this communication. It's someone's job to make that happen. And I think, Verena, you're going to send these ladies and gentlemen an article about this.
Yes, we'll send them an article on knowledge exchange.
Yep. Okay. So, 3 approaches. If you start with the problem, what is the problem we're trying to help solve? Understand it from your stakeholders. And then say, how do we know if we've solved it? One way of doing that is a competency framework, looking at outcomes, looking at effects of what you do instead of inputs. And then saying, how do you get to those outcomes in what you teach, in the different ways students learn, and in the different conversations I have with those stakeholders to make sure that we're all working together.
And I think just to add out here, sometimes it may already be, I don't know if you said this because I was on the other channel, sometimes it may already be evidence because you would have, like the president has said that, digital is very much a part of the agenda as a part of the economy out there. So you may not need to go and do that particular, you already have the evidence to go and make those changes using your autonomy to respond to that.
Just put the Russian version up there. I think that will help some people.
There you go, yeah.
Okay. So then, steps to it. Understanding the problem. Work out how you can solve the problem. And it's just making those changes lesson by lesson. And that's the opportunity that academic autonomy gives you. Because you can make those changes to solve the problems yourselves. Because you can work with the local industry and your local students to think through those changes that you want to make. And then go back and do it again, and go back and do it again. It's a continuous cycle of learning with your stakeholders and with your students around you.
Excellent, Neil. Yeah.
Yeah, all good. I think at that point we are. Oh, it's also. My goodness, it's 5 o'clock. So, I think at this point, very quickly, has anybody got any questions on that? Any ideas that came from that? And Varane, you'll hear the discussion. I can't hear it.
I'll just go back there. Yeah. Yes, please encourage them to ask any questions, even if they ask in Russian on chat. Yeah.
Я уже задал и ответ получил. Да, спасибо.
Is that Mr. Bhaktiyor, yeah? Kadir Kolor, yes. He was asking about where to find the research. Yes, sure, yeah. Excellent, yeah. Okay, Neil, so yeah, you can go ahead and, so I think, yeah, go ahead and sort of do the poll, yeah?
So a quick poll, ladies and gentlemen, for the right at the end here. I'd be interested to find out, and this is in English, so I'm going to ask Nilüfer to translate the options for me. Pick an option, ladies and gentlemen. It'd be interesting to find out. Aha, right. Votes are coming in. I can see people starting to click.
Excellent. People are filling the responses. Very good, Nilüfer. Yeah. It'll be really good to get, sense for where people sit, because then we can, make sure responses are tailored. That's excellent. Yeah. Yeah, no, we can see it. So for 40% have voted already, and we want to.
I'll share the results in a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Right, just another 10 seconds. Click whichever answer applies to you. Okay, so I'll bring that to an end and I shall share the results. And that's interesting. So a lot of people on this call seem to have some responsibility for changing the way lessons are taught. That's one part. But some are also responsible for talking to the stakeholders and are also responsible for looking across the learning instead of just the teaching. So that's interesting. So we've got all the different levels of responsibility here. Very nice. I'll leave Nilüfer to do that.
Excellent. Are you going to do the second one?
Yep. So let's do the second one.
Have you shared the results, right? Yeah.
Yep. So which of these 4 things do you think is the most important problem for you to solve? Is it creating autonomous learners? Is it developing self-study skills for students? Is it getting their employability and creative skills? Is it meeting the needs of the labour market and industry? What are you hearing right now from the stakeholders around you? It'll be interesting to learn together as to what the world is telling us. Which do you think? Okay, votes coming in. Interesting. Give it another 10 seconds, ladies and gentlemen. See what we think. Let's see what we think.
Все проголосовали.
Right.
Хорошо. Excellent. Well, that's
There we
okay. Good.
There we go. Interesting. Quite a balance. Self-study skills, employability, and labour market, all really quite balanced across all of you. That's quite interesting. So there's a lot going on.
Hmm.
Okay, so
So I think we want to ask them what is the thing, thinking and what is the yeah. Sorry.
so two questions, ladies and gentlemen, for you that we'll just finish with, that we'll use the chat window for. What challenges do you think you're going to encounter when setting out on academic autonomy? And what would you like to know next?
So I'll get onto the Russian channel, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Yes, thank you, Niloufar. If we can get some feedback in terms of, what are the perceived challenges that they might face in implementing at any level, just so that we are understanding of, if this is a useful introduction, where do they think the barriers might be, and what might they want to learn about next? I think if we could just, yeah.
Are we getting any answers here, Varun?
Yeah, we're getting answers. Yeah, you can see it coming on the chat.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, is there anything else that people would like? Sorry, let me get back here. So Niloufar, is there anything else that they would like to learn, or what are the blockers they feel that they might have in trying to implement some of this? Do you want to answer the ones that are already on chat, Neil?
Right. So, well, there's only two I can understand.
Mm-hmm.
So one is, what is the most effective method of teaching in the process of digital learning, in your view? There is something very important about having the right tools. And I know in some parts of Uzbekistan that's quite hard because the internet is not fully everywhere. So I know that you've got, for example, I believe you've got some lessons going out over television, for example, which is a great idea. The answer for me is simple. It's what we've said here about the organization of learning. You move from telling them things to getting them to work on things themselves, discovery learning, and you can do that really well digitally, because you can start people off on something, send them the way to go and do it, and they can come back later. So it's the same. It's good pedagogy is just good pedagogy, whether you do it digitally or whether you do it face to face.
And I just want to add two things in this process. When you move from physical learning to digital delivery, the classroom presence, the physical space of learning disappears. So you need to think of a few things to do that. And if you do that well, it's even better than physical learning. One is there is a process of contracting with the students of how it's going to go and what they need to do to make that process beneficial for both sides. So there is a whole process of coming to an agreement and arrangement that they will participate. And the second is that there is a lot more focus on the process of learning rather than the content, because you can send them content in advance. And as Neil said, the time spent together is more on trying out things, giving feedback, having a discussion, moving on. Very much the same thing that we are trying to do here, rather than presenting or spending a lot of time on a lot of slides and content, which they can actually do offline as well. So the time spent together digitally is best spent on keeping their interaction levels going rather than purely dissemination of knowledge.
Simple stuff. Think about the barriers. Simple stuff like making sure everybody has a microphone so you can talk to each other. Makes a big difference.
Makes a big difference.
Makes a big difference. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, in the slides that we will send you, some of the resources we've shown you, the links are there in case they're useful for you.
And I think it might be useful, Neil, just to go to ETC Toolkit and just show them, because I showed Bhakti or how to get to mathematics. So there might be just something
Right.
there.
So let me do that now.
Yeah.
Get my Zoom window out of the way. So, for example, if I were doing something in science, technology, engineering, and maths, let's imagine I'm doing something in chemistry. Here are case examples and how-to guides to bring enterprise learning, which is just one example, it's only an example, into chemistry, because there are 5 different things you could do here. So this is the Enterprise Educators UK toolkit, which is this here.
So this is more about developing their soft skills around the subject discipline rather than how to run better experiments, because that's a very curriculum area focus. But we just wanted to share that some of these techniques are available for you to translate and adopt and use. Yeah.
All good, right, Varun? I think we've taken an hour and 15 minutes now.
Yeah.
So I think.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining. I know some of us struggled with the connection technology, but we welcomed each and every one of you to be here. It was also, please understand, it was also an innovation activity at our end that we tried to do it with simultaneous translation, with flipboards. And every time we do this, we learn a little more about the process. So we're all in the journey together, because as COVID has come, it has actually taught all of us that we need to push the boundaries of learning and see how we can actually not just make use of the technology, but also find out what are the positive sides of using this technology to connect with all of you and share some of the things that might be interesting. So if from the session you just pick one thing and go and make one change in your areas of work, in terms of exercising the autonomy that you have to make a better life for the students and their employability prospects into the future, it would be a fantastic thing, and we all would know that we've done our jobs well to have done this session. I want to thank Nilofer very, very much, Nilofer, for staying with us. And it was a complex subject, so very, very grateful for you.
Absolutely.
For being patient, for preparing with us. You spent a lot of time preparing with us out there and translating some of the slides. And thank you to Olga and Jamili and the team back at British Council for doing this, and Shahnoza for getting all of you together to come and attend the session. We're available later if you want to share or have any queries or questions out there. But for now, for having shared your time and spent the time with us, we wanted to give you a very, very big thank you. We might send you a survey a little later to get your feedback on the session, as we've also tried to be innovative and creative, and look forward to seeing you in person or in a session like this in the near future. Thank you very much.